So, thank you, Emmanuel. It's really good to be here. I'm not entirely sure why Dave asked me to do this talk. It may have been that he thought somebody working in physical health would be the ideal person to talk about physical well-being. I wish it was the fact that what he saw was a person in perfect physical shape, but I absolutely know that wasn't the case. But anyway, most of you will know that I work as a physiotherapist and I spent all my entire career helping people try to get back into improved physical health after injury or illness. And during that time, I've become increasingly aware that people's ailments, physical ailments, are often an overspill of other things going on in their lives. A painful relationship, a disappointment from the past, a story of unforgiveness, living with the consequence of a bad decision, unhealthy lifestyle choices, fear of illness or death. I could keep going. And yet we can all find ourselves neglecting our physical well-being to cushion us from all sorts of things. Emotional stress, financial uncertainties, or difficult relationships. Maybe we have another extra drink at the end of the day, or we hit the hobnobs after a really difficult time, or we stay up late watching trash TV instead of going to bed and getting some rest. Bit by bit, we can become depleted, exhausted, and unhealthy. The trouble is, we can't neglect our physical health and expect the rest of our lives to be untouched. In this series, we're exploring the interconnections between these different areas of our lives and the importance of being attentive to them. These interconnections could also be described as wholeness, and that is a kind of a perfectly well in body, perfectly well in mind and soul and spirit. This isn't a new idea. You know, we hear about this a lot, about wholeness, and it's quite trendy, isn't it? But it's not a new idea. It was God's intention for us. It's the way He made us. But it's not a place and a state that we easily occupy. When we think of our physical well-being, it's easy to separate it off and either idolize it, we pamper ourselves, we buy more stuff, we follow the latest fad, or we neglect it and we don't exercise, and we don't eat well, and we get tired. The thing that God has shown me gently over the last few years is that I don't have to follow either of these tendencies. All I have to do is follow what the Father is doing. In Matthew 7, Jesus is explaining what the kingdom of God is like. He's already spoken about how we should pray. He's talked about provision and trust. And then he warns us about getting distracted with easy formulas for a successful life. And that's something that I really don't want to do today. He says, give your entire attention to what God is doing right now. And later he says, knowing the correct password, saying master, master, for instance, isn't going to get you anywhere with me. What is required is serious obedience, doing what my Father wills. And we can see this theme repeated throughout the New Testament. We see it in Colossians, we see it in Ephesians, and we see it in Romans. And I found this such a liberating truth. Just follow the Father. Just follow what the Father is doing. And He will lead you into well-being, into life in all its fullness. And in John 10:10, it says, Jesus is saying, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. There's so much that could be said about this area of physical health, but I just really want to briefly touch on three things. The first is, why is attending to our physical health so important? What can I do to look after my physical well-being? And what about when I don't experience physical health? So let's look at those three things. So, first of all, our basic needs are physiological. That is, we're designed to service our basic biology and stay alive. And we realise that quite easily. Think about how you feel when you miss a meal. Or, as I did yesterday, go for an 18-mile walk and forget water. Okay? It's not good. And our body tells us that we need water, that we're hungry, that we're thirsty. And equally, what about when we've overdone it? What about when we have the extra portion of the apple crumble? Or what about when we finish off the box of chocolates? We feel lethargic and we feel unhealthy. The body tells us we've gone too far. The fact that you can only survive for 3 days without water is a stark example of that. But being physically healthy provides us with much, much more. And in the Wellbeing book that we're using for this series by Dave Smith, he quotes an author who's talking about human performance, and this is what he says. Physical energy not only lies at the heart of alertness and vitality, but it also affects our ability to manage emotions, sustain our concentration, think creatively, and even maintain our commitment to whatever mission we are on. Yeah, so true, isn't it? So, another reason, the spirit needs a place to live. The other thing that our body provides us is with this, is a place for the spirit. The Bible tells us in Genesis 2 that God created a physical body from the earth, and then he breathed spirit into it. The spirit gave life to the body, and man became a living soul. From that point forward, humans have a spiritual nature with a soul within a physical body. And Paul in his letter to the church in Corinth is making that connection between physicalness, the physical bodies, and the presence of God. And he says, don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple, and that God's Spirit lives in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him, for God's temple is sacred, and you are that temple. And then a bit later, along the same theme, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you've received from God? You are not your own, you were bought at a price, therefore honour God with your body. And then we see God prioritising our physical well-being. We look at how that is not just a provision, but he often prioritises that. And Dave referred to the story of Elijah last week. And if we go on with the story, we see further on in 1 Kings that Elijah had been in direct confrontation with the king of Israel, Ahab, and the prophets of Baal, and there'd been a big conflict there. And this had resulted in Queen Jezebel issuing a death threat on Elijah. And he was pretty scared when he heard that, and he basically ran for his life, and he ran a long way. He travelled from Jezreel in the north to Beersheba in the south. That's 178 kilometres by Google Maps. Okay? And you can do it in 2 hours in the car, but if you're on foot, it would have taken him a bit longer. And he would have been under huge mental and emotional and spiritual stress. And then at the end of this journey, he's physically exhausted. He was a broken man. And it says, in the account, it says, when Elijah saw how things were, he ran for his dear life to Beersheba, far in the south of Judah. He left his young servant there and went on to the desert another day's journey. So that's on top of 178 kilometres. He came to a lone broom tree and collapsed in its shade, wanting in the worst way to be done with it all, to just die. Exhausted, he fell asleep under the lone broom tree. God didn't waste time trying to deal with his intellect or his spiritual life, because that wouldn't have done him any good. Elijah needed rest. He needed restoration. And so God let him sleep. And then when he'd had enough sleep, he woke him up, he provided food and water. And then guess what he did? He made him go back to sleep again. Sounds great, doesn't it? And I think that's something we see following on in Jesus' life, because Jesus modelled it. Excuse me, have a quick swing. In Matthew, he refers to the father-son relationship again as a model for a balanced and full life. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. We're all familiar with this verse. And this is the Message version, which I think just gives it another take. Are you tired, worn out, burnt out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you will recover your life. I'll show you how to take real rest. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it, and learn the unforced rhythms of grace. And I love that kind of translation. In Matthew 15, a bit further on, we read that tons of people come to Jesus because he was healing people. And paraplegic people, blind people, people who had got serious injuries, they came to Jesus because they wanted to see what he would do. And he healed them all. And in the Message it talks about God was blazingly alive among the people. Can you imagine? But Jesus wasn't finished with them. These people had come from all over the region. They weren't just from the local town. They'd come everywhere to see Jesus. And he wasn't done. He says, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I don't want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. And so then Jesus, there's 4,000 people, and he gets a few loaves and a few fishes, and he feeds 4,000 with food left. So what can I do to look after my physical well-being? This is really where I had in my mind that we might have a list of exercises or something from my professional background, but I decided against it because we'll be spending some time on Wednesday looking at some of the key elements of our physical well-being: sleep, exercise, and diet. And I think that would be useful to go through that then. There's application for all of us in this area. God might be prompting you already about an area of your physical well-being that he wants to make more complete. And it's great to respond to that prompt, to allow the Father to lead you into more wholeness, to learn those unforced rhythms of grace that Jesus talks about. Since Dave asked me to prepare this talk, I've been quite challenged in this area of my life. I was feeling a bit burnt out, was struggling with a return of persistent neck pain, and was working long hours and not sleeping well. And this coincided with a few days away to the Lake District, and Ali and I arrived there pretty exhausted. As we enjoyed the open spaces, the steep hikes, and the beautiful views, it was obvious as we talked that things had got a little out of kilter again, as they often do. And I could sense the gentle correction of the Father to do things differently. I could tell you many, many stories of not getting it right, and how I've taken life, and so could Ali. And she could tell you how I've taken my physical well-being for granted, and how easily I veer off course. Working long hours, eating late at night to help me keep awake, and definitely not getting enough rest. But then I can think of times when I prioritise my physical well-being. When my son James was 3, he was diagnosed with a condition affecting his hip that had a significant impact on his life. It forced him into hospital for several weeks, and I couldn't help notice, as I visited him every day, a poster in the lift, which was inviting volunteers to raise money for Children's Hospital by doing a tandem skydive with the Red Devils. Literally, my biggest fear. At the time, I couldn't think of anything that I would want to do less. But as I turned up every day, I just got this prompting that I should be doing this. And I thought it would be good to support the hospital and to thank them for the care and treatment that they've given to James over the weeks. The trouble was, I was in my 30s, just, and during that time I put on quite a lot of weight. And if I didn't do this jump and hit the target, I'd have to lose 2.5 stone. Quick. Yeah? I had 10 weeks, and every night I would wake up in a cold sweat, and Alison will tell you this is true. I'd wake up in a cold sweat thinking, I'm not going to do this, it's ridiculous, I'm going to phone them tomorrow, I'm going to cancel my place. But then at 6 a.m, the alarm would wake me up, and I'd be on my exercise bike from the start of my program for the day. My diet was organised. My bedtime was fixed. At funny times of praying, reading my Bible was easier too, and I remember that time being a time of richness and growth. I suspect we can all think of times when we felt on air, and other times when we've felt out of kilter. And it would be good to consider where you're at and just ask the Father where He's leading you. Paul encourages us in Romans 12. I plead with you to give your bodies to God. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind He will accept. And when you think of what He has done for you, is this too much to ask? And I think I didn't really want to kind of complete this without talking about this. This is the hardest thing. What about when I don't experience physical health? The truth is that we don't always feel great. Sometimes that's our doing. Sometimes we get ill. Our bodies grow old. But we do have a future hope. When we eventually die, we are promised a new body. And John Piper says this: the old body will become a new body, but it will still be your body. There will be continuity. God is able to do what we cannot imagine. The resurrection is not described in terms of a totally new creation, but in terms of a change to the old creation. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 says that our current bodies are weak, perishable, unglorified, and natural. Okay? That's the harsh reality. But in the resurrection state, we're told that they'll be powerful, not subject to stress or fatigue or weakness. They'll be perishable. We won't get sick. We won't die. We won't age. Great. Or become injured. And they'll be spiritual. They'll be fully orientated to and filled with the Holy Spirit. And they'll be glorious. And then we come to healing. Many of you will have experienced God's healing touch on your lives. Some of you will have experienced physical healing. We can take for granted God's original design of healing in our bodies. Bleeding stops, wounds heal, we develop immunity to disease, bone rejoins after fracture. The psalmist expresses the wonder with that verse that you all have heard: I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And yet sometimes we don't see people get healed, and it's hard to understand why. Many of you will have heard Wendy Mann speak to us on Zoom a few months ago, and what she said really impacted me about the mystery of this unanswered prayer. You may remember her referencing the story of her praying for a mum for physical healing, and she didn't get healed. Wendy talked about her disappointment, but not allowing the disappointment to lower our expectations of what God can do. She talks about always praying into what you know about God's character, and we know God's heart is to bring healing to brokenness, whatever is broken. And when we are healed, we start to recover things that were lost. We start to experience restoration. It might be learning to walk again in my job. It might be restoration of a broken relationship, or rediscovering intimacy with God. Go back to that verse that we read earlier on from John 10. I came that I may give you life, and give you life abundantly. And it was interesting to hear those words that came in the beginning during the worship about hope and healing and restoration and so on, and stuff like that as well. These themes have a special meaning to me, and just before we close, I just want to just quickly tell you why, because I think there's something here for all of us over this area. A number of years ago, having gone through a really tough time personally, I was feeling chronically depleted and lacking vision for the future. It was a really tough time. And I remember asking God some big questions. What should I be doing now? Where am I most centered in your purpose in my life? I explored this intensively for several months, recording insight and revelation from prayer times, things people said to me, prophetic words, psychometric tests from the internet. I did everything. And then I put it all together on this big mind map, which I've still got somewhere. I thought it was a genuine effort to detect God's purpose and calling on my life. But looking back, I wanted an out. I wanted a more exciting calling. Once I'd looked at everything, what I saw surprised me, and if I'm honest, annoyed me. The overwhelming conclusion was, just keep doing what you're doing. Some helpful person also gave me this verse, which I'm sure you will be familiar with. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. I didn't want to. It was difficult. It was lonely. Whilst I was grumpy and disappointed at the time, we kept going, and bit by bit, we have seen God's promise unfold right in front of us. He brought us the right people. He gave us a new energy and a fresh calling to bring us hope, healing, and restoration. Yes to the physical, but open to all that God is doing. And surely that is the call on our lives. Just as we have received the future hope that Jesus promises, and as He draws us into a deeper relationship with Him, that we are available to bring God's hope, healing, and restoration to the brokenness around us.